It's an amazing oasis of agriculture, and it's surrounded by industrial development.
They called her crazy when Sarah Martinez announced she was ripping up her pristine suburban lawn to plant a food forest. Her neighbors in Phoenix, Arizona, thought she had lost her mind. The Homeowners Association threatened fines.
Does not want the folks that remain here at the farm.
City planners questioned zoning violations. Local gardeners warned that farming doesn't belong in suburbs. Her perfectly manicured quarter-acre lot had been the envy of the neighborhood. Emerald green grass, ornamental shrubs, the kind of landscape that screamed successful suburban family. But Sarah saw something different. She saw 10,000 square feet of wasted potential in a desert city where fresh food traveled thousands of miles to reach grocery stores. "You'll destroy property values," neighbors complained. "It will look like a jungle," the HOA president warned. "This is not appropriate for our community," critics argued.
And I know statements like that have been made about these farmers in another way.
Even her own family questioned whether transforming their beautiful suburban yard into what seemed like an agricultural experiment was worth the risk. But Sarah had a vision that went far beyond what anyone could imagine. Over the next 7 years, she would prove that a single suburban backyard could produce more food than most people thought possible. What happened next shocked her neighbors, transformed her community, and created a model that cities across America are now trying to replicate.
We do various types of chards, kales, we do collards, dandelions.
Behind the scenes, something extraordinary was taking shape. Quietly, systematically, and relentlessly. And the transformation that followed would challenge everything people thought they knew about suburban living. Welcome to Forgotten Lands, where we uncover the impossible transformations that changed everything. To understand the magnitude of what Sarah accomplished, you need to see what she was up against. Her suburban neighborhood in Phoenix was the epitome of traditional American landscaping. Water-hungry lawns in a desert climate, ornamental plants that provided no food, and strict HOA regulations that demanded conformity above all else. The challenges were staggering. Phoenix receives less than 8 inches of rainfall annually, making traditional agriculture seem impossible without massive irrigation. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 115 degrees Fahrenheit, creating conditions that would kill most food plants. The alkaline desert soil had a pH of 8.2, far too high for most vegetables. The caliche layer just 18 inches below the surface created drainage problems that had defeated previous gardening attempts. The social barriers were equally brutal. The Homeowners Association had strict rules about lawn maintenance and appropriate landscaping. Section 4.7 of the HOA covenant specifically required maintained turf grass covering at least 60% of front yard area. Neighbors worried that any deviation from the manicured suburban aesthetic would hurt their property values. Local zoning codes weren't designed for residential food production, creating potential legal complications. This is suburban Phoenix, not rural farmland, critics argued. Food production belongs in agricultural zones, not residential neighborhoods. City planners questioned whether intensive food growing violated residential zoning restrictions. The fire department raised concerns about tree placement near structures. Even experienced gardeners warned that the desert climate made year-round food production impossible without greenhouse facilities. The financial skepticism was intense. Converting a traditional landscape to food production required significant upfront investment with no guarantee of success. Insurance companies questioned liability issues related to fruit trees and potential slip hazards. The HOA threatened fines of $200 per violation for violating landscape standards. Local contractors refused to install irrigation systems for experimental agriculture in residential zones. The water restrictions added another layer of complexity. Phoenix municipal water regulations limited residential irrigation to specific days and times. The city's tiered pricing structure made excessive water use prohibitively expensive. Neighbors complained that any increase in water usage would affect the entire block's conservation ratings. The technical challenges seemed insurmountable. Desert soils lacked organic matter and beneficial microorganisms essential for plant health. The extreme temperature swings, from 115 degrees Fahrenheit days to 45 degrees Fahrenheit nights, created stress conditions that killed most temperate food crops. Wind patterns in the Sonoran Desert created additional desiccation problems that made establishing young plants nearly impossible without extensive protection. If you're inspired by stories of people defying conventional wisdom to create something extraordinary, comment "forest" below, and and let me know what you think about transforming suburban spaces into food-producing paradises. The transformation began in 2016 with what seemed like an act of suburban rebellion. Sarah started by removing sections of water-hungry lawn, replacing them with raised beds and drought-tolerant fruit trees. The initial changes were subtle. A few vegetable beds where grass used to grow, some berry bushes along the fence line, a small herb spiral near the kitchen door. But neighbors immediately noticed the difference. "It looks messy," some complained. "This isn't what we signed up for when we bought in this neighborhood," others argued. The HOA sent warning letters about non-conforming landscaping and threatened fines if the changes weren't reversed within 30 days. Sarah's response was to double down on her vision. Instead of backing down, she began implementing permaculture principles that would maximize food production while creating a landscape that was actually more beautiful and sustainable than traditional suburban yards. She hired a permaculture designer to create a master plan that would transform her lot into a productive ecosystem. The breakthrough came when she started thinking vertically. Instead of traditional row gardening, Sarah created food forest layers, canopy trees producing nuts and fruits, understory trees with citrus and stone fruits, shrub layers with berries and herbs, ground covers with vegetables and medicinal plants, and even root layers with tubers and bulbs. The water-wise design was revolutionary. By using desert-adapted fruit trees like pomegranates, figs, and jujubes, strategic shade structures, and sophisticated drip irrigation systems, Sarah created microclimates that could support food production year-round, even in Phoenix's brutal climate. The food forest actually used 40% less water than the original lawn while producing thousands of pounds of fresh food. The soil transformation was equally impressive. Sarah imported 15 cubic yards of compost and began intensive composting operations using kitchen scraps, fallen leaves, and wood chips from tree trimming services. She installed a gray water system that recycled water from washing machines and bathroom sinks to irrigate fruit trees. The previously alkaline soil gradually became neutral as organic matter increased and beneficial microorganisms established themselves. The first year was brutal. Summer temperatures killed half of her initial plantings, despite shade cloth and intensive watering. Neighbors pointed to the dead plants as evidence that the project was doomed to fail. "See? We told you this wouldn't work," they said. The HOA used the plant failures as justification for demanding immediate restoration of traditional landscaping. But Sarah persisted. She researched desert-adapted varieties, improved her irrigation timing, and learned to work with the extreme climate rather than fighting it. She discovered that many Mediterranean and Middle Eastern food plants thrived in Phoenix conditions once properly established. Pomegranates, figs, dates, almonds, and citrus trees were actually better suited to the desert than the water-hungry ornamental plants they replaced. The visual transformation was stunning. What had started as a standard suburban lot began evolving into a lush, multi-layered ecosystem. Pomegranate and fig trees provided canopy cover, their branches heavy with fruit by the third year. Citrus trees created productive shade, yielding oranges, lemons, limes, and grapefruits throughout the winter months. Berry bushes formed natural privacy screens, producing blackberries, raspberries, and goji berries. Vegetable beds nestled between fruit trees created a tapestry of green that was far more interesting than any traditional landscape. The first major harvest came in year 2, when Sarah's quarter-acre lot produced 1,200 pounds of fresh food. The neighbors who had been skeptical suddenly found themselves curious about the baskets of fresh produce Sarah was carrying into her house daily. The visual abundance was undeniable. Fruit trees heavy with produce, vegetable beds overflowing with greens, herb gardens providing fresh seasonings year-round. But the most shocking discovery was the production numbers that followed. By year 3, Sarah's suburban lot was producing over 3,000 pounds of fresh food annually. The pomegranate trees alone yielded 200 pounds of fruit. The citrus grove produced 400 pounds of oranges, lemons, and limes. The vegetable rotation system generated 150 pounds of fresh produce monthly, even during winter months. The diversity was staggering. Sarah's food forest produced over 80 different varieties of fruits, vegetables, herbs, and nuts. Ancient grains like amaranth and quinoa thrived in dedicated beds. Medicinal herbs like echinacea and calendula provided natural remedies. Culinary herbs like rosemary, thyme, and oregano grew year-round, eliminating the need to buy dried seasonings. By year 5, production had increased to over 5,000 pounds per year as trees reached maturity and soil fertility peaked. The fig trees were producing 300 pounds annually. The berry bushes yielded 180 pounds of fresh berries. The herb gardens provided more fresh seasonings than the family could use, creating surplus for sharing with neighbors and selling at farmers markets. The pomegranate harvest alone became legendary in the neighborhood. Each tree produced 80 to 120 pounds of fruit annually, with some individual pomegranates weighing over 2 pounds. The deep red arils were sweeter and more flavorful than anything available in stores, commanding premium prices at local farmers markets. By year 7, her suburban food forest was generating over 8,000 pounds of fresh fruits, vegetables, nuts, and herbs annually. The accumulated harvest over 7 years exceeded 20,000 pounds of fresh food from a single suburban backyard, more than most small commercial farms produce per acre. If this incredible transformation from suburban lawn to food paradise is inspiring you, hit that like button and subscribe to Forgotten Lands for more stories of people creating abundance in the most unlikely places. The neighbors who had initially complained were now asking for tours. Margaret Thompson, who lived next door and had been the most vocal critic, became Sarah's biggest advocate after tasting homegrown pomegranates for the first time. "I had no idea food could taste like this," she admitted. "Everything from the store seems flavorless compared to what Sarah grows." The transformation wasn't just visual, it was sensory. The food forest filled the air with the fragrance of citrus blossoms in spring, the sweet scent of ripening figs in summer, and the earthy aroma of fresh herbs year-round. The sounds changed too, as the landscape attracted birds, bees, and beneficial insects that created a symphony of natural activity that replaced the mechanical drone of lawnmowers and leaf blowers. The same people who had worried about property values discovered that Sarah's unique landscape was actually increasing home values throughout the neighborhood. Real estate agents began marketing the area as an innovative, sustainable community. Properties near Sarah's food forest were selling for 8% above comparable homes in similar neighborhoods. The economic impact was staggering. Sarah's family was saving over $8,000 annually on grocery bills while eating higher quality, pesticide-free produce than anything available in stores. The surplus production allowed them to sell at farmers markets, generating additional income of $3,200 annually that more than paid for the initial investment of $12,000 over 3 years. The cost breakdown was remarkable. Traditional suburban landscaping in Phoenix costs an average of $2,800 annually for water, fertilizers, pesticides, and maintenance services. Sarah's food forest required only $800 annually in inputs while producing $8,000 worth of fresh food, a net positive return of $10,000 per year. The environmental benefits exceeded all expectations. The food forest was sequestering an estimated 2.3 tons of carbon annually through increased soil organic matter and tree growth. The diverse plantings supported beneficial insects, providing habitat for native bees, butterflies, and predatory insects that controlled pests naturally. Bird populations increased dramatically as the food forest provided nesting sites and food sources that didn't exist in traditional suburban landscapes. The cooling effect was remarkable. Temperature measurements showed that Sarah's food forest was 12 to 15 degrees cooler than surrounding properties during summer months. The shade from fruit trees and evapotranspiration from plants created microclimates that reduced energy costs for air conditioning by 30%. Water usage had actually decreased by 40% compared to the original lawn, despite producing thousands of pounds of food. The biodiversity transformation was extraordinary. Before the food forest, Sarah's lot supported fewer than 12 species of plants and virtually no wildlife. After 7 years, the property hosted over 200 plant species and provided habitat for 45 bird species, 23 butterfly species, and countless beneficial insects. The food forest had become a wildlife corridor in the urban desert. The social transformation was equally remarkable. Neighbors who had been skeptical began asking for advice on converting their own yards. Children from throughout the neighborhood started visiting to learn about where food comes from. The food forest became an informal community gathering space where people shared knowledge, recipes, and fresh produce. Sarah began hosting monthly harvest parties where neighbors could help pick fruit in exchange for taking home fresh produce. These events became so popular that she had to limit attendance to 20 people per session. The waiting list for tours grew to over 100 people as word spread through social media and local gardening groups. The educational impact expanded beyond the neighborhood. Sarah partnered with local schools to create outdoor classroom experiences where students could learn about desert ecology, sustainable agriculture, and nutrition. Over 500 students visited the food forest annually, many experiencing fresh, tree-ripened fruit for the first time in their lives. The ripple effects extended far beyond the immediate neighborhood. Sarah began teaching workshops on suburban food forest design, charging $150 per person for weekend intensive courses. The workshops filled up months in advance as people traveled from across Arizona and neighboring states to learn her techniques. City planners started consulting with her about updating zoning codes to encourage food production. The Phoenix City Council passed Resolution 2021-47, creating incentives for residential food forests, including reduced water rates for properties that replaced lawns with food-producing landscapes. Other Phoenix neighborhoods began implementing similar projects, creating a network of suburban food forests throughout the city. The success attracted attention from urban planning experts across the country. Arizona State University's School of Sustainability began studying Sarah's techniques for application in other desert cities. The research showed that if just 10% of Phoenix's suburban lots were converted to food forests, the city could produce 15% of its fresh produce locally while reducing water consumption and urban heat island effects. The model proved that suburban food forests could work in climates from Phoenix to Las Vegas to Albuquerque, potentially transforming food systems across the American Southwest. Universities in Nevada, New Mexico, and California began developing similar programs based on Sarah's pioneering work. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the transformation was how it changed the entire concept of suburban living. Sarah had proven that residential neighborhoods didn't have to be food deserts dependent on industrial agriculture transported thousands of miles. Suburban lots could be productive landscapes that fed families while creating beautiful, sustainable communities. The HOA that had initially threatened fines eventually changed their regulations to encourage food forest landscaping. The new guidelines, passed unanimously in 2022, specifically allowed edible landscaping that maintains aesthetic standards while providing food production benefits. Property values in the neighborhood increased as the unique sustainable features attracted environmentally conscious buyers willing to pay premium prices for homes near the food forest. The crazy experiment had become the most desirable feature of the entire community. Real estate listings began highlighting proximity to the neighborhood food forest as a selling point. New residents specifically sought out the area because of its reputation for sustainability and community cooperation. Today, as you drive through Sarah's Phoenix neighborhood, her quarter-acre food forest stands out like an oasis of green abundance in the desert landscape. Where once there was water-hungry lawn producing nothing but maintenance costs, there's now a thriving ecosystem that feeds her family year-round while inspiring an entire community to rethink suburban living. The transformation is visible from satellite images, a green jewel in the brown desert suburbia that has inspired similar projects throughout the Southwest. Sarah's success has been featured in permaculture magazines, urban planning journals, and sustainability documentaries as a model for climate-appropriate suburban development. Sarah Martinez proved that with vision, persistence, and smart design, any suburban backyard can become a food-producing paradise. Her 20,000-pound harvest from a single residential lot demonstrated that the future of food security might not be in distant farms, but in the suburban landscapes where most Americans already live. From suburban lawn to food forest paradise, from neighborhood controversy to community inspiration, from 20,000 pounds of fresh food to a model for sustainable suburban living, Sarah's transformation proved that sometimes the most revolutionary changes happen not in rural farmland, but in the suburban backyards where ordinary people decide to create something extraordinary.